I've been on BookTube for over 6 years, and I've obviously accumulated a lot of books in that time. And over the years, my reading taste has changed a lot. I've gone from reading a lot of YA books to now reading mostly adult. I previously exclusively read sci-fi fantasy books, and now I mainly read literary fiction and historical fiction. Now, over the years, I've also purged my collection many a time. I have several unhaul videos up on my channel if you want to go check those out. And in each of them, you'll see a common thread of either me getting a lot of books from, say, publishers that I didn't necessarily want, or me impulsively buying books when I really shouldn't have. I used to be obsessed with getting like the collector's edition that had the beautiful illustrations and the embossed cover. And these days I look back on those copies and I just realize how much space they take up. Unlike other people who collect books as a hobby and actually display their books really well, I don't really care about displaying my books in like the prettiest way on my shelves. For me, my bookshelves are actually more functional. Like I just want them to hold all my favorite books. I want to be able to look at my shelves and immediately see the books that I love and the ones that I want to recommend. So personally for me, I think I'm starting to shed this idea that I need to have certain copies of books, or that I even need to have a physical copy of books that I've read. There are a lot of books in my collection that I have read and maybe enjoyed or even loved, but I don't actually see myself reading them again, so I don't actually see a point in keeping them. I used to have this notion also that like all of my favorite teen books or like kids books, I would want to keep them for a future child or nephew or niece that may be able to read them one day. But as I think about it more and more, that kid is never going to relate to the things that I related to when I was a kid. Although there will be some similar themes, I do feel like there will be new books with even better representation that are even more reflective of their lives in the future. Now, the elephant in the room for this conversation is obviously ebooks and audiobooks and just digital reading in general. In the past couple of years, I've definitely gotten back into e-reading. I was into it way back in like 2018 when I got my first ever Kobo as a gift, but I honestly just didn't use it that much because I still really liked the concept of having physical books and using them, and the feeling of collecting books like some sort of dragon with their hoard. But in the past couple of years, I've definitely come to the side of seeing the benefits of e-reading a lot more. I personally just find it so much more convenient to instantly borrow or buy a book on my e-reader, and I love the idea of bringing this one lightweight device with me wherever I go and being able to read as many books as I want. I also just love reading on my Kobo at night before bed. I have always been a before bed reader, especially growing up, and whereas before I just ruined my eyesight reading in very bad lighting, now I read on my e-reader and it's just so perfect and it doesn't bother my sleep later on, and it's overall such a wonderful experience. Now, in addition to e-reading, I've also just come to the side of really loving audiobook reading. As someone with ADHD and with some major focus problems as I've gotten even older, I've just loved the way that audiobooks make reading way easier for me. I can listen to them while I'm doing other things. I feel more productive because I'm getting done different errands and just like work around the house. And I love that they bring reading to people who may not have been able to pick up physical books before. Anyways, with that in mind, I'm going to be unhauling 60 plus books in this video. I live in a tiny apartment in downtown Toronto, and there is not enough space for the amount of books that I have. So a lot of the books that I'm going to be unhauling today are a lot of my YA books that I actually still brought with me when I moved. A lot of them were ones that I had read and wanted to keep as part of my collection for this far off future. And then there was also a bunch that I hadn't read that I knew a lot of other people loved, and I was like, I need to pick these up at some point, so I'm going to bring them with me. But lo and behold, it's been like 10 months since I moved and I haven't touched a single one of them, so they need to go. And then aside from the YA books, I've also got a bunch of adult books that I just no longer feel I want to keep as part of my collection. Since I don't want this video to be like 80 years long, I'm not going to go in depth into each of these books, but I will give you a overall view of them. Okay, this is going to go here while I talk about these books. Okay, starting with some books that are actually duplicates of books that I already have in my collection. I have Against the Loveless World by Susan Abulhawa. It's by a Palestinian author. Really phenomenal literary fiction. I've got Things We Do in the Dark by Jennifer Hillier. This is a thriller. I've got this really massive edition of The Fragile Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab. This is the beginning of the new series that comes after the Darker Shade of Magic series. Although I like that series, I'm not super crazy about it, so we'll see if I even get to the other copy that I have of this. And then I've got this special edition of The Atlas Six by Olive E. Blake. I actually really like this book. I have the 2 sequels to the series as well, which I haven't read yet. And this copy in specific is the Waterstones edition. It's got these really beautiful sprayed edges. And then it's also got the UK cover, which has like these little extra elements on the cover. But I was looking at it in comparison to the US cover, and I honestly just like how this one's a little bit more clean, and it also matches the sequels that I have a bit better. So that's why I'm deciding to get rid of this. Now, I'm sure you're curious how many of these books I've actually read versus not. And out of these 60 plus books that I'm unhauling today, I've read about 30 of them. So next I have a couple adult fictions that I've actually actually read that I just don't feel like keeping as part of my collection. I have In the Skin of a Lion by Michael Ondaatje. This is a Canadian author that I read for a class in university and honestly just didn't really like it that much. And then I've got The Secret Keeper of Jaipur by Alka Joshi. This is the sequel to The Henna Artist, which is a book that I actually really loved, but this sequel just didn't do it for me. Okay, next I have some romances. So I have It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. Oh my god. I have It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. I read this for a vlog where I read spicy romance books recommended by other booktubers, and this one was definitely the worst of them. Next I have The X-Hex by Erin Sterling. This was a cute and fun witchy romance, but I honestly just found it really forgettable. Next I have Butcher and Blackbird, and based off the things that I've heard from some of my friends who have read this, I don't really think I'm gonna like it. Next I have Shoot the Moon by Issa Arson. I honestly don't know too much about this one, but it doesn't really feel like something that's up my alley. Okay, I've got Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh. This is an arc that I got at some event. It's a sci-fi. I honestly don't think I'm gonna read it. Now, some of you may remember I posted a video at the beginning of 2024 where I basically summarized a bunch of books that I wanted to read by the end of the year, and if I didn't, I would have to unhaul them. So Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth was one of those books, and a lot of you actually commented on that video and told me that this book wasn't really worth it, so that's why I'm getting rid of it. Okay, next I'm getting rid of the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. This is probably a surprising one for a lot of you since I really loved the original trilogy. It was honestly one of my favorite sci-fis and I really enjoyed it at the time, but looking back on it now, I don't really see myself rereading the series, and I also don't see myself continuing with the series. I have read Iron Gold, but I didn't really enjoy it, and although I went to the signing for Iron Gold and Dark Age, I just didn't really feel like I liked those books and didn't really feel like I wanted to continue with the series. Now, besides those reasons for not keeping the series, I also don't want to keep them because I don't want to have Pierce Brown's books on my shelves. Some of his social media posts in regards to the situation in Palestine just wasn't it for me, so I do not want to be owning his books. Next, I have some non-fictions. I've got Sink, which is a memoir. I know nothing about this. This was sent to me. I've got My Body by Emily Ratajkowski. I've heard not great things about this, so I don't really want to pick it up. And then I've got The 4-Hour Workweek, which is a book that I bought when I was in my productivity phase. It was really toxic, and I do not want that energy anymore. And honestly, I didn't even end up picking up this book, and I don't plan on doing it in the future. I did skim through it though before deciding to include it in this video, and it honestly just seemed so bro-y to me, I couldn't. Okay, next I have all these adult fiction, sort of literary fiction, and also historical fiction books. Most of these were sent to me by the publishers, and I didn't really ask for them. I believe a few of them are award winners, and I think a couple of them are Scotiabank Giller Prize winners, and we do not support Scotiabank in this house. A couple of those that I did want to point out though are The Time Traveler's Wife, which I swear I bought like earlier this year or end of last year and was like, oh yeah, I want to read this because the show is out. And honestly, I can't see myself reading this, so I'm getting rid of it. And then I'm also getting rid of Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Although I've liked a couple of her books, I don't really see myself reading this one. It's just part of her backlist, and I don't really think it's gonna be that good. And I honestly just don't care to read it because I'd rather read from an author of color. Okay, I think that's all of the adult books. Now I'm gonna go through the YA ones. So the first pile of YA books that I have are actually a bunch of books where I've read the first book and I liked it, but I never got around to reading the sequel, and now I just don't see myself ever picking them up. First, I have Bloodmarked by Tracy Dion. I really love the first book in this series, Legendborn, but this one honestly just dragged for me and I ended up DNFing it. I have How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories by Holly Black. This is like a companion novella thing for the Cruel Prince series, and although I like that series, I don't really care for this extra story, so I'm gonna pass it on to someone else who might want it. Honestly, as I'm talking about these books, I feel like I want to unhaul more of the books on my shelves, like some of the old series that I used to like, but I wouldn't really see myself reading again. But I also feel like I'm still a little bit precious about them, so I still need some more time to pass before I get rid of them. Next, I have two books in the DC Icons series. So one is Wonder Woman Warbringer, which was written by Leigh Bardugo. I had meant to pick it up, but I never got around to it, and now I don't care. Batman Nightwalker, I did read this one. It's like a younger version of Bruce Wayne, and although it was fun, it was really forgettable. The Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nagan. I really liked this first book. I thought it was a really lovely sapphic fantasy, but I never ended up getting around to the second book, and I honestly don't see myself doing it anytime soon, so Girls of Storm and Shadow is also going. Next, I have this really random series that I liked before, which is Rebel Mechanics. I've read the first book and I really enjoyed it. It was like this alternate version of American history where British magic prevents the American Revolution from ever happening. Although I really liked this first book and I actually ordered the second book, which was self-published, it wasn't even traditionally published, I didn't end up actually reading this, so I feel like I need to get rid of this. Next, I've got the Tiger at Midnight series by Swati Tirudala. Malala. This was actually a really fun South Asian inspired fantasy series. I read the first book, The Tiger at Midnight, and the second book, The Archer at Dawn, but I never ended up picking up The Chariot at Dusk, which is the third book, because I honestly didn't like the second book as much as I liked the first book. Next, I have the Crier's War series. This involves artificial people and like a sapphic romance, which was really cute. And although I liked the first book, I didn't actually end up picking up Ironheart, the sequel. Same thing again for the Winter Song series. I really liked the first one, but I never actually got around to reading Shadow Song, the sequel. And I honestly just felt like the first book stood on its own really well and didn't really need a sequel. All right, next I have this stack of YA books that I never ended up reading. And although I think that some of these could be good, I honestly just don't feel like I want to read them. There are only so many hours in the day and only so many years left of my life, and I'd rather be reading some other books instead. And this is not to diss YA books, I absolutely love them, but I personally just don't feel like I am in the mental place where I want to be reading these. I'd rather read some more adult books that are more relatable to me now. Next, I've got V.E. Schwab's The Archived series. So I've got The Archived and The Unbound. These were her YA series that was fairly unpopular. I found these pretty good, but they were fairly forgettable. Next, I've got Ace of Spades. This was a dark academia. I actually really enjoyed this one. It was a very well-written thriller, but I just don't see myself reading this again, so I don't see a point in keeping it. And then I realized I could say the same about these other books. So Frankly in Love by David Yoon. I really loved this book when it first came out, but honestly, I just don't see myself reading it again. I feel like it was perfect for that time in my life, but now I want to just pass it on to someone else who will appreciate it. And I could honestly say the same thing about The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. Phenomenal book, but I think someone else could also pick it up. And then I've got Lovely War by Julie Berry. This is like a historical romance. It was quite good, so I'd rather pass it on because I'd never read it again. And then I've got another Holly Black, which is The Coldest Girl in Cold Town. This was like a vampire book, and I actually really liked it. It was fairly unique, but again, I don't see myself reading this again. Okay, we're on to our last stack, so let's go. This is Slay by Brittany Morris. This was like a gamer thriller. I've got Sadie by Courtney Summers. I remember liking this, but I honestly didn't think it was as good as everyone else seemed to think it was. And then I've got Again But Better by Christine Riccio. I actually really enjoyed this when it first came out. I thought it was a fun, cute rom-com, but again, I wouldn't read this again. Next, I have Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. I actually quite enjoyed this when I first read it, but I think as I thought about it more and more, I started to not like certain aspects, so that's kind of why I'm getting rid of it. And then I've got Every Day by David Levithan. I actually really loved this when I first read it. I thought it was a really interesting concept. It's basically about this person who becomes a different person every day. They inhabit a different person's body, and they essentially like live in these people's lives and exist in this weird way. I really like the concept of this, but I feel like it lacked a little bit of nuance now that I think about it being older. So it'd be interesting to see it in an adult book a little bit more fleshed out. Next, I have 1,000 Nights by E.K. Johnston. I actually really liked this book back when I first read it, but now I think back on it and I honestly don't know why I liked it. I think it was mainly because of the writing. It was really pretty, but when I think about the story, I don't really like it as much. And then I've got I'll Be the One by Lila Lee. This was such a cute YA contemporary. It was a bit like a rom-com, and it had this really amazing plus-size main character. She was also bi, and she was honestly a character who just felt like sunshine to me, so I really enjoyed this one. I just wanted the best for her throughout the entire book, and I can honestly see someone else just picking this up and really loving it, so I'd rather pass it on. Okay, I think this is the last book for the entire haul, but I have This Time Will Be Different by Misa Sugiura. I remember this being a really well-written YA contemporary, and I remember that it touched on some really deep topics. I think it also dealt with teen pregnancy, so overall I think it was really well done, but I would like to pass this on to someone else. Behold the wreckage of all of the books that I unhauled in this video. Let me know your thoughts on the books that I unhauled, if you're outraged or not, if I've unhauled any of your faves, and feel free to make your case in the comments on the books that you'd like me to still keep and read. I'll see you in my next video, and please remember that the story ain't over. Bye!